All right, moving right along. Now it's time to talk about music. And I'm really excited about this because for this week, one of my favorite artists put out a new album this past Friday. Gavin Dance put
Oh,
out an album called Afterburner. And let me tell you, I have been nonstop playing this front to back. And you know what? I will go ahead and I'll do the honors. I'll go ahead and talk about it first because
sure.
yeah, I've got a lot to say about it. So for those that don't know, they released 4 singles off this album. It was in no particular order. It's "Prisoner," "Lyrics Lie," "Strawberries Wake," and "Three Wishes."
Mhm.
Um, all fantastic singles. But they surprised us because when the album actually came out, there's a lot of songs on the album that were like a complete 180 from the 4 singles released, which I loved because
Yeah,
I love it when artists keep you on your toes.
for sure.
Same with like Fall Out Boy's Mania album. They
Oh,
released. When they released Young and Menace, you were like, "Whoa, this is like totally different." Um, Same with Dance Gavin Dance. They released their album, and there's one particular song that I really, really enjoy because it showcases not only Tillian's vocals, but of course John Mess's screams. And it's just got some sort of a groove to it that it's like they've never really hit on before. And it's like it
mhm.
really showcases the bass and guitar. And obviously Will Swan's guitar is just like insane, like it is every album. But it kind of took more of instead of aggressive in your face approach, it kind of like took a step back, but in a way that was like, it wasn't too suppressed, but it was like Goldilocks. It was just right. It was like the perfect amount.
The Goldilocks method.
Yeah, the Goldilocks method, which I think works for them for sure. There's a song called "Parody Catharsis,"
Mhm.
which is I think it's in the middle of the album, and it perfectly just
Track
sums up.
6.
Yeah, track 6, and it sums up. I mean, the entire album to me personally. Some
Mhm.
people might enjoy the others. Obviously, like I said, the singles are great. What do you take away from it? What's your takeaway?
I honestly, I've had, like, 2 or 3 listens to it at this point, like, top to bottom. I mean, I've heard the singles many times, and I was pretty familiar with those.
Mhm.
Um, but like I said, 2 or 3 listens through, I was really shocked that this was a Dance Gavin Dance album in a good way. I was like,
Right, exactly.
because their past few releases, especially with Tillian on board, have been just bonkers good. And so, like, going through the track list, the first 2 are just solid tracks. That's 2 of the singles. So that was expected. And I love the way Prisoners opened the album,
Hmm.
just like straight into their style, just right off the bat. But the third track, when he starts singing in Spanish and they have that Latin beat kind of
Yep,
over the instrumental, I was blown away. I was like, this is the kind of stuff that makes them special, when they can throw out some stuff like
exactly.
that. And to me, that shows not only like versatility, but it shows that you're creatively thinking of how far you can stretch the band with the singular idea of who they are. Instrumentally, vocally. It's like, how many different ways can we stretch that? And I love when bands do that. And that was the track that sold me on this album. I was like, that is what that's what I want. And so going through the rest of the album, when you get to songs like, for instance, Born to Fail, um,
Hmm.
and just things like that, Strawberries Wake, all those songs, they pull so many different angles, from the Dance Gavin Dance, I guess, style catalog, if you will,
Hmm.
that I was really impressed with. So far, I lean towards the singles as some of my favorite songs, but I would say as a non-single, track 3 was just, it blew my mind. I was not expecting that. And
It was
like
a
I
good
said, hearing
shock. It was like,
singing in a different language and different rhythm, choices in that really made that track stand off at the very beginning. It's like, haven't even got through the rest of the songs yet, and I was really hooked.
yeah, that I don't know how to pronounce it. I got it right here. Calentamiento Global.
Yeah.
We'll say that's what it. Yeah, that was the one I was talking about. That was a good shock factor. It was like, whoa, this is like nothing we've ever heard before. It's just
Mhm.
it's crazy. And then kind of in the going on to the later half of the album, with let's see, what are we looking at? Parallels. That was the one that opened up with that guitar riff that was very just relaxed.
Yes.
It was like they had to basically tell Will Swan, like, "Hey, we know you're an insane guitarist, but take it back a notch. Like, don't be such a good guitarist." And he's kind of like, they're like, "Come up with something simple," and he's like, "Okay," and then just came up with that riff, and it was like, that's still just mind blowing. It's just like such a great riff to. It's so catchy. Another track I really liked was "Say Hi." It showcased John Mess's screams really well. It was kind of like it had that tempo that was it you know, that break in the song where it was him and it kind of mainly drums just slowing it
Yeah.
down, and he
Almost
was
like
kind of like,
spoken word kind of style too. Like he wasn't
yeah,
necessarily screaming the entire, phrase. He would kind of go in and out of screaming between
yeah,
that
it was like the
and
dynamic was going, it was flowing. It was like you're trying to start a car and it's like, and you're like, oh, you're like,
but if you're into
is it,
that,
yeah, it's like, is it gonna rev up or is it gonna just go away completely? You're just like, oh my gosh, I don't know what direction this is going. My only complaint through the whole album, and this is very very nitpicky, but in past albums of theirs, the very last track was normally, it was like kind of they gave everything they had and then that was it. Because with artificial selection, evaporate, it was like pretty much the ending was just pounding you in the face. You're like
yeah,
boom boom. You're like, oh my gosh, this is like what's going on. And then with their other album, Man of the Year, was the very last one, and same thing. I mean, there's a scream in it that John just held out for like I don't even know how much time, and it was just like you're like, what is happening?
yeah,
But in this one, it's like again they kind of Into the Sunset's the last track. It's like they kind of took it back a notch, and you're just kind of like, I mean, it was don't get me wrong, it was a great song, but it's just kind of like, oh, again, not what we were expecting. And I think they did that because they're like, well, we don't want you to think the last track every time is going to be us just pedal to the metal.
right. You definitely don't want to be predictable with them.
Yeah, so that threw
Another
me
thing,
off. So I was like, oh, okay, well,
another thing they probably realize is like this whole album, like there's not a whole lot of downtime, and so this was their way to like kind of give you a breather as the listener, because like each track on this album just like hits you, not always as aggressive as some of the other ones are in some of the past albums, but it does like song after song after song. There's something new and exciting about it, and this is kind of like their way. And I enjoy when albums kind of do this, is they use the last track as kind of like reflection. It's like now you
mhm,
get a chance to process everything you've heard. I know Under Oath has done that a couple of times, which is really cool because like their album just pound and pound and pound the entire time. Um,
mhm,
but then they give you that last track to kind of as a breather. But it goes along with the entire narrative of the album. You start strong and you end soft. But then what you were saying on the last albums where they just hit you all the way through, and then at the finale they just hit you with everything they got. There's something about that too that just feels so triumphant, and you leave that album thinking about that last song, not
right.
necessarily like all the other details, but you like your last memory of the album when you get to the last song kind of sums up the whole thing for you.
Yeah, exactly. And again, it's different, and each album is perfect. And then I'll remember Afterburner is like, oh wow, like they really just let you breathe a little bit
Yeah,
when they made you think, oh, we're gonna go all the way. They're like, nope, actually, gotcha. We're just gonna take it back a notch, and we're gonna let you kind of think about the album.
I
Just
did
kind of
notice
like,
it was a lot more melodic than past albums, which those are still melodic too, but like this
mhm,
one heavily relied on whether it was the guitar melody or
mhm,
Tillian's vocal melody, um,
yeah,
and not so much on like guitar chugs or drum beats as much. I mean, it's still rhythmic, but like you didn't have a lot of those moments like in the past albums where it was like just jamming out, and it was very vocally and melody driven, which I liked. I liked it a lot, especially with
oh
Prisoner
yeah,
when they bust out into that giant chorus after all the technical stuff they do in the verses, and they just belt out in that chorus. That to me, that's what they're really good at, is just taking something very technical, very arranged, and then just blowing it out in the chorus into something very melodic and groovy.
mhm,
Like that's the favorite aspects of the band, and so when they capitalize on it throughout the album, especially in the singles, but when it's sprinkled across, it's really awesome to hear.
Oh, absolutely. And yeah, like you said, the melody for sure was a big part of this album. And I really liked. I think it was One in a Million, track 4, or no, 5. Yeah, 5.
Mhm.
Um, there was a moment in that where the music just broke and it was just Tilling's vocals, and he was harmonizing with himself.
Yeah,
I love that because I was like, he doesn't really like Tilling's one of those guys that's like has such an amazing voice, but he's not going to brag about it. And so it's like I like that a song was dedicated to him, just straight up, just going solo and with no other noise, just straight vocals harmonizing.
yeah,
So I really like that aspect, and I was like, dang, that's what I've been waiting for.
yeah. I feel like he's gonna be what people latch on to when they hear the band. Like for us as musicians, we enjoy and appreciate the instrumentals, but like if I was just to show this to anybody that maybe not be a musician or may not be used to that style, I feel like his vocal and what he
Right.
brings to the band is what gets people hooked.
Yeah, because I think you said it perfectly. Because all my friends and family that aren't musicians like us, I just tell them, hey, listen. I was like, this guy named Tilly, and I was like, that's all you need to know about this. I was like, listen to his vocals; they are insane. And I even had a guy the other day, one of my coworkers. I showed it to him, and he's like, yeah, it's not really my style. He's like, but man, that dude can sing. I
Yeah,
was like, exactly. I'm
that's
like,
nothing against like Johnny Craig or any of the other singers they've had in the past, but
oh
what
no,
he's
yeah, yeah,
done since this band's been around for quite a while now, he just he just brought new life to it, and they've just soared with him involved. It's really cool to see.
yeah. And yeah, like you said, because Johnny Craig, the stuff he's got going on, his solo stuff right now, that works for him. I mean, that's more his, uh,
Yeah.
that's his style. I mean, it just and who else was it? Was it I'm blanking on the name. Let's start Roll Coda.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, Kurt Travis, I believe.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean that works for him because I listened to them and I was like, wow, that's a good style that he got. It's more just straight rock, and so I'm like, that makes sense for him.
Mhm.
So yeah. Well, anyway, I could talk about this album all day, but I know we got other music to talk about.
What would you rate this one compared to the other Tillian albums? Where does this one kind of sit for you?
I'm biased, so I'm going to put it way up there compared to Artificial Selection, just because it's branched out. I mean, it's just crazy how much it's branched out. Even aside from their 2 singles, Headhunter and
Mhm.
Blood Wolf. So, I mean, I'm going to put this at like a 9.5. I mean, it's almost perfect to me. I have to give it a few more listens to actually get, you know, a better idea. But so far, yeah, I'm gonna leave it at 9.5. Artificial Selection, I give like a 8.5, just because there was a few tracks that I weren't crazy about.
Mhm.
But yeah, so there you go. That's my rating. What would you give it?
I would probably, I mean, even though it's still fresh, I mean, I have to give it some time. But right now, I'd have to say it's my number one. And I know that that's a lot to say at the moment because I may not feel the same way later. But to me, this has like been the most diverse album so far, and the most engaging album. Because with with how they've been, going with the past few albums, they've been, aging like fine wine. So like each album has its own personality, but it all feels consistent. This is the one that's not as consistent with the past, if that makes sense, but in a good way. So
Mhm.
like they've found new ways to reinvent themselves. Like I said, with expanding their genre to Latin music and all these different things that you've never heard them do before. And to me, as a listener, I look for those kinds of things. So for me, it's up there. Which Mothership was my favorite um, currently, but I think this one is up there with it. I don't know if it's gonna. I mean, I said it's my number one, but I think that's tied with Mothership right now, and then Artificial Selection, and Acceptance Speech. But yeah, for me, it's a good album. Like I was very impressed.
Yeah, and like I said, I'm biased. It's my favorite band, so I'm gonna put them all up there. But I mean, it is a great album. Like you can't say that it's not, even for people that may not listen to them all the time. So yeah, so there you go. There you have it.
All right, so we'll move on to the next album, which is a band called Picturesque.
Mm.
With their latest release, Do You Feel Okay? So this album has been in the works for a while. I've been following this band for maybe a year or two now.
Okay.
They're fairly new themselves. I think they got started in maybe 2016 or 2017, but they've only put out one album before this.
Right.
What got me into them, I found them randomly on Spotify one day while I was at work. And essentially, to someone who's not familiar with them, they kind of are reminiscent of Pierce the Veil, um, Sleeping with Sirens, and possibly even some Dance Gavin Dance thrown in there stylistically that I thought was a really interesting mix when I first found them. And after seeing them live a few times, I've really grown to like them a lot. And so with this new
Mhm.
album, I was really expecting, honestly, a lot of the same stuff that I heard on the first album, but that completely changed once I got through it. So the first few singles they had put out over the past year were songs like "Swipe" and "Crimes"
Mhm.
and "Pray," and it was kind of giving you a lot of different variety that the band is capable of, which I really appreciated hearing that. And
Yeah.
then right before they dropped the album, they put out the song "Attention," which is track number 2.
And that got my
That is
attention for sure.
that that definitely got my attention and it hooked me. I heard that
Yeah.
sucker and I nearly leapt out of my chair because I said, "This is the Picturesque that I was looking for on this album." Definitely
Oh yeah,
different from what
absolutely.
they've done in the past, but they took it a completely different direction. And there's like 2 or 3 songs on here that are like that, that really give you a new view on who they are as a band and what this album kind of tells you about them. Like I said, you have some of those songs on there that are a little bit more traditional, like their previous album. They were probably done around the same time that they were, probably concepting this new album, but then came up with new
Mhm.
ideas on the way. Because this has been in the works for maybe a year or two. I think their last album was 2017. Um,
Yeah, so I got it right here. Yeah, 2017, I believe, was the year for that last album. Mhm.
and so going from that to what does Picturesque sound like in 2020, they did a really good job of making that jump and making you feel like they really thought through that process in a different way to keep everyone engaged. So for me, the highlights of this album were definitely Attention. Um,
Mhm.
Necessary was another single. It's the first track. I love how that one grooves. It's very steady, steady beat on that one. And then there's songs like Swipe and Pray that are a little bit more, some influences they brought on this album were some hip hop elements, which I thought was really interesting coming from a
Mhm.
rock band like this. Um, I thought it added something dimensional for them, so they're not just seen one way. But it definitely gave them more character at the end of the day, for sure. But
Yeah,
my number
absolutely.
one off this album is Attention. I could listen to that song for hours and hours and hours and find something new in it the entire thing. It's such a earworm of a song. The melody,
Mhm.
it's intense, but for me, what makes the song is that guitar riff and that drum beat
Mhm.
that just marry so well. It very very reminiscent of like Prince or even Michael Jackson in some ways, which may seem weird to some people, but that's like immediately where my mind went. And even the band Issues has kind of played around with that idea of like this funk rock fusion. Um,
Mhm.
they did that on their song Flexin', which was really interesting to hear because that
Yeah.
was the only song on the album like that. But for me, that's something I would love for them to explore more in the future. But for this band, for sure, Attention is a really cool direction. I feel like if they tried that a little bit more in the future, I wouldn't be opposed to it. I feel like that's something like that will get them a lot more ears than some of their more traditional writing styles. But
Oh yeah.
definitely, this album blew me out of the water. Like I said, it hooked me in by the second track to where
Yeah.
like with Dance Gavin Dance, it took me to track 3 to be hooked. This one hit me with the second one that I was not ready for, but I wanted.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, it was, I mean, when I listened to it, it reminded me there was parts where I was like, especially with the guitars, I was like, "Man, I feel like Tom Morello is playing these guitar." There's one solo, I was like, "Whoa," like, that was like Tom Morello
Yes,
guitar solo right there. I was like, "Dang," and then there's one
artwork on
track
this
that
album.
I mean, I had it reminded me of, like, Muse, The Killers, just straight good rock bands. I mean, another one was The Main. I mean, all those bands, I was like, dang, they could definitely compete with all those bands right there.
Yeah.
And I like that they took their time making this album, obviously, because like it's been 3 years since their last one.
Hmm.
I think they needed that because it's very crucial in the bands, like especially when they first start out, that you don't want to just pedal the metal, get all your ideas out, and be like, okay, go, 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 pump out album. You see so many bands do that, and then they kind of, it's like, okay, well, now what? You get stuck, in a rut. But I think they did perfectly. Like I said, it's just picturesque. I can now say, if I told someone, like, someone came up to me and was like, what's a really good, just straight up rock band that's current right now? I'd say go listen to Picturesque album. Like,
Yeah.
if you want some good straight rock, that's what you want to listen to.
And I think the way that they're doing it is keeping it current, like I said, with the hip hop influences, which is really mainstream right now. But then,
Exactly.
and then flipping what we know as rock on its head in a way where you're like, yeah, this has got attitude, it's got groove, and it's honestly like current and innovative, which is really really cool to be able to hear that in today's world where music is so global and it's so like genre bending already. Like there's so many different songs out there, whether it be on the radio or just bands in general, that just constantly question what the genre that they're put in with each release that they
Right.
have. And this is a band that's doing that for sure.
Yeah. I think it's good to not put yourself in a hole in that sense, because if you just label yourself, oh, well, I'm this. It's like, well, then you're gonna always stay that. But it's like like you said, they do it in such a way that's like they basically are tricking you into listening to rock. Like you don't realize it's rock because it's like they got a bowl of food, but they disguised it as something different. But at
Yeah,
the same time, at the surface or beneath the surface, it's definitely rock. Like there's no getting around it. But
yeah,
it's good for people that aren't already exposed to that type of rock or music, and so they listen to it, and like you said, they think, oh, this, like I said, they'll think of Michael Jackson or Prince or Muse or other bands that are big, and they're like, oh wow, and then but underneath it all, it's picturesque, and they're who they are. It's perfect.
yeah. And I mean, my final thought would be if for the rock genre in general, like if there's more bands out there that can pull um, this idea off of like how can we take this genre, reinvent it, keep it current. I think that that's what's going to keep the genre moving forward, and will also spring up different bands, that are influenced by that, and
Yeah,
build that community more, and maybe see some more bands like that on the radio.
yeah, I agree.